What's up, everybody? We are in the stew with the man, the myth, the legend. Some of you guys don't even know what type of legend we have on. This is Anthony Arasi. He is an absolute legend in the cheer music industry, and there are some of you that have literally sang his songs, and you didn't even know it was him. So please welcome Anthony Arasi. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Thank you for having me, sir. Pleasure to be here.
Man, I am so excited. So I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture, and I've only known you for, I think half a dozen years, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I'm going to paint the best picture I can, and then please fill in, let everybody else know. But again, Anthony Arasi, he has an incredibly, technical and professional title with New Level Music. He is the man behind anything that looks good, sounds good, and is good about my music. It is because of Anthony Arasi. He helps bring it all to life. He is also one of the composers and audio engineers for the Level 77 catalog. I'm pretty sure every single album has passed through his ears in studio and hard drives. He also records artists. He's also an artist himself that sings, has performed on legendary tracks. Like if you think of, I know Stingray Orange was a big one that you did for several years. If you listen to Max Senior Stars Pyramid music the last 2 years, this is the man that is singing that track. But like I said, there's a ton of gaps that I don't know. So please tell everybody, your title, what you do in sheer music, and anything else that I may have missed as far as your professional stuff goes.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me. First off, absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Anthony. I have been working with New Level Music and namely Pat, who kind of runs and began it for about 11 years now or so. I came to him initially as a consultant. So I'm a studio engineer, so do a lot of recording, mixing, mastering, post-production here in Atlanta where I'm based. And years ago, Pat was working on an album. He sort of was looking for personnel for it. The first engineer he had to mix it didn't quite work out. They were looking for a second one. The guy who made a lot of the production on that album and I happened to be friends, so he referred to me. Pat and I started working, and we kind of became fast friends and partnered up pretty quickly after that. So I've been working kind of in a technical capacity in the cheer industry for a little bit over a decade now, and been kind of mixing music and working in the music industry for about 15 years. That's kind of it. I'm also chief technical officer and lead engineer for Level 77, like Bode mentioned. So that is a production music library. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's music for TV, film, video games, corporate usage, anything like that. Our company is kind of a three-headed beast. So we have a production library of about 10,000 unique tracks that people can license off of us. And then we have custom wings. So if you need something built bespoke for you for a project you have, we can build something. And then we have a scoring division. So if you've shot film or content of any sort and you need scoring for it, we can do that for you as well. So I spend all my time doing that and working with you lovely people on the cheer side. And that's kind of life as we know it right now.
Right on. And talking about, commercial tracks and all that, I recently was watching, I don't remember what game it was, but there was a Roger Dunn Golf Shop ad that aired it was on my iPad, so it was streaming, and I heard the instrumental for the song Look No Further that's on Level 77.
Nice.
And I heard it and I was like, yo, we're rocking. We're on mainstream TV. We're on a Roger Dunn Golf Shop ad. And yeah, I recognize your work, sir.
We've really made it now, baby. The Roger Dunn Golf ad. No, I mean, we're lucky, man. Yeah, you'll definitely encounter our music in random places all over TV and film and, sports. We do a lot of stuff on like ESPN and Fox Sports and stuff like that. So you can hear us everywhere.
Well, there was just recently, I don't know when this episode is going to air. Right now we're at the tail end of February, but you just recently, Level 77 partnered with some ad. It was a commercial that just came out. What was it? I can't believe I'm drawing a blank.
So we did, the most recent thing I think that was bigger was an ad for Synchrony Bank, which was affiliated with Madam Web, which is new Marvel flick, I believe, that just came out. Or I don't know if it's a movie or a series. I guess it's a movie.
It is a movie.
Yes. Yeah. Very cool. So we were involved in a collaboration that Synchrony has with that film, and it was really cool. It was really cool to hear our work on there. And we got to build that trailer ourselves, actually, like a lot of the sound design. Alex Cabrera and Patrick worked on it really hard, and we got some good legs on it, man. It was really cool.
That's awesome. Outstanding. Okay,
Yeah.
so now we're gonna kind of take it back, and you mentioned how you got into the cheerleading side. You kind of got referred by another audio engineer. But how did you get your start in being a professional when it came to music, production, engineering, all that stuff? Like, when did that begin for you? And kind of take us on that journey a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, man, for asking about that. I was, a vocalist since I could speak, like a lot of singers are. You kind of learn when you're young if you have some natural proclivity to singing, which I think I did. And pretty quickly, when I was a teenager, I was like a lot of young kids, trying things, quitting things, trying to figure out what I liked and didn't like, and eventually landed on guitar. My mom just was kind of desperate for a way to occupy, I think, me and my brother, and so she put us in lessons. Him on drums, actually became a phenomenal drummer, still to this day, very talented, and myself on guitar. So eventually I really took to it when I was about 13. Realized pretty quickly that music was a thing I really liked and sort of, again, had some natural proclivity towards. When I was in high school, I was playing in a band based here in Atlanta, and this would have been around like the early 2000s. And we had like a mild dusting with fame and success. And by mild, I mean very mild. We played a couple shows with a band that when I was young was all over the charts, a band called Incubus, and we played a couple dates with them. And our we were outside this venue in Nashville at River Stages, which is one of their big kind of concert, yearly concert festivals. And we were signing autographs as like teenagers in front of a bunch of people who had no idea who we were. And I just kind of looked around at what we were going through for a second. Was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Whatever I have to do to figure out how to do this forever, like that's what I want to do. So I learned pretty quickly on in my journey that being an artist is kind of the last thing you want to do in the music industry if you want to make a sustainable and meaningful living. It's very difficult, and you deal with a lot of rejection, which I'm not comfortable with. So I wanted to seclude myself in a dark cavern, which is kind of what the studio is. Honestly, I owe a lot of what my success to a friend of mine, a guy that I was in bands with named Wes when I was younger. He told me about Full Sail, which is a program in Orlando that lets you kind of, at the time, it was an accelerated associate's degree program in what they called the recording arts. And then you could get that 2-year degree in 1 year, and they just would really drill you. They'd give you like crazy hours and sort of outrageous curriculum, and your goal was to thrive. And so it sounded like an adventure to me. So I took it up with this man. He and I went there, spent my year, graduated, did an internship at a studio for maybe a couple months. It was supposed to be like a 6-month internship. It ended up being like a month or two. And kind of the first big break I got, incidentally, was at a session where the main engineer who was supposed to be there didn't show up. And because he didn't show up, they needed somebody to run Pro Tools, and I was the guy there that knew how to do it. So they let me do it. And that was really cool. I made every mistake in the book, but fortunately, myself and the client got along really well, and they had me back the next time that I recorded with them. And then from there, I was lucky. The studio I was at initially had a really good kind of like networking sort of reach. And so through just a lot of word of mouth, honestly, I was able to secure a good bit of work. And then unfortunately, that studio kind of shut down due to some, we'll just call them shady business practices that the owner dealt with. And so, yeah, then I was kind of on my own. But fortunately, I'd had a pretty good client base built up and was able to kind of navigate freelancing as a mixer and recordist for a couple years. At some point, wanted to make some extra money, got a gig at a marketing agency writing copy, which was kind of fun. And then at that point, I had been consulting Patrick. So I met Patrick, like I said. He was working on an album back in the day called Reigning Champions, for any of you cheer
Reigning
veterans. Cheer
champions.
veterans, anyone listening will probably remember that album and kind of remember that process. And so that was cool. I mean, Pat's always had a vision for trying to take the fun stuff that we love about cheer music production and sort of inject it with modern kind of pop and dance sensibility. And so I think Reigning Champions was his early effort to do that. And this was of course, I'll never forget the release date because it was noteworthy. It was November 11th 2011, so we released on 11/11/11 for good luck. And but that was the first project I ever worked on with Patrick, and he had an engineer working on it. The guy dropped the ball here and there, and Pat was looking for a replacement. It ended up being me. And then from there, he kind of would bring me in to consult him on the cheer side, right? So he told me after we were done with this album, hey, my main gig in music is I build this cheer music, which is, music for competitive cheer and dance teams, which I didn't even know was a thing that existed on this planet until he told me about it. And of course, once it's one of those strange niches that reveals itself to you when someone explains it, right? So you think about, okay, yeah, well, of course, every high school has a cheer team, every college, and there's these kind of freelance all-star gyms that also operate these cheer programs, and it's just a staggering industry that you don't really know much about until you know about it. As you well know, as everyone in this industry knows, it's a kind of a clandestine cloak and dagger situation until someone opens your eyes to it. So the first time he played me a cheer mix, I'll never forget. I mean, it was virtually unlistenable to me. I had no idea what was happening. I was confused by the sound effects. I go, why is there like a Star Wars space battle happening back here? There's like explosions and lasers, and I'm pretty sure some chick was going woo for no good reason. And I was like, why is the music telling me to do things? It was saying go, go, let's go. All these like old cheer samples from back in the day that were just, it was great, man. So what really connected for me was seeing it paired up to a visual. So once I saw the video paired up with the audio, and I'm pretty sure I was thinking about this not too long ago because I was telling someone else. I believe the first video and mix I saw would have been like Cheer Athletics, maybe Wildcats 2011 or 2012 or something like that. So it was like one of the higher profile teams doing a really high profile routine. This was like back when they did Worlds at the stadium and they had the footages from the stadium, which was very cool. So that was when it connected to me, and I go, okay, this is like soundtracking, right? This is like taking a movie or a visual image sequence and scoring audio to it. And then that's when it kind of enlightened me. So spent the next like year or two with him just consulting every couple months. I would come in and I would, say, hey, let's try this. Let's work on these processes, use some new software, try some different, what they call plugins, which are little kind of miniature pieces of software within audio software that allow you to do certain specialized processes, namely things like equalization, compression, and special effects like that. So we'd experiment with that. Eventually he tells me, hey, I have this other company where I contract out with other producers who do what I do. Maybe you can come aboard and help them get their sound, tighter, like I've been working on mine lately. So I said yes, because that sounded like a cool opportunity. And that's kind of where we are, man. We then started building up what we now know of as New Level Music, through various different programs, like our vocal program, instrumental loops, finding new producers, and then it's kind of just snowballed from there, man. So that's kind of where I started, and how I've roughly gotten to where I am now, in a nutshell.
Right on. Man, thank you so much. There's so much to unpack there that, I mean, honestly, if it was just you and me, I'd be like, okay, wait, back up to the, like, you opened for Incubus, which that's nothing small, man. Like, dude, I was rocking out to Incubus. I also attempted to be in a band, very, very short lived.
Right.
And we played a couple Incubus songs. Like, that was a big deal, like
Amazing.
that's a huge deal.
They were a
And you're
big
signing
band to
autographs.
us. They were really important to us when we were playing, my guys and I. Oh, and fun fact too, that same gig was there was another band that opened, I think maybe one or two bands after us, and they were fronted by a then up and coming young actor named Jared Leto, and the band ended up being 30 Seconds to Mars, which was
Yo.
really cool. So I kind of saw them like at their dawn, and incidentally, Jared Leto actually came up to one member of our band, I forget who, during sound check, and we were chatting, and he goes, "Hey man, you guys are really hard, man. You guys are killing it. You're pretty heavy." And so we were like, "Dude, Jared Leto said we were heavy," and it became like a big meme within our band for a while. And we were like, "We should name a song called Jared Leto Thinks We're Hard," something like that. It was
Yeah.
good times. But yeah, man, it was fun to be like 17, 18 years old and kind of experiencing that. And I knew some of my friends who had graduated high school and started working jobs, and it looked a lot like indentured servitude to me, and I sort of didn't have much interest in it. And so I was like, all right, whatever I can do to sit around with my friends, have fun making music, and pay my rent and support my other fun habits. That's kind of all I really cared about, and that was the goal. And ever since then, that's just kind of been the focus, man. Just focused on making as much quality music as I can with my favorite people in life, yourself included.
Oh man, I appreciate it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is, and again, there's so much to unpack there. Like, I want to touch on, going to Full Sail. I know that's a big, like, but, and that's for, you're on the trajectory of being, like a major recording label, audio engineer, producer, composer, and then to take this hard right into cheerleading music, which, it's like there's really not much fame and notoriety. However, what I will say is, they're within the community. It's like, people, number one, they know your sound. Like, when they hear it, it's like almost instant, right? But then also, there's people that absolutely, I think, and we're going to get to this a little bit later, but like, when you're in the arena at Worlds in whatever, 2016, or I can't remember the last year you did Orange when you were the Pyramid song, right? You
Yeah.
go in there and there is 10,000 people singing the lyrics to you performing. It's like you are a rock star in that moment. And like I want to, we're gonna dive into that later. I don't want to put the cart before the horse. Um, and another thing that I absolutely have to, if people haven't figured it out yet, I mean, I guarantee you there's like 3 words you've said that I have to Google when we end this call. Like Anthony not only will like get your stuff sounding right, but he's also going to teach you at least 10 to 15 SAT words, right? That you're going to learn. So if anything, this call will be educational. It's definitely increased my vernacular. And like I'll say a word, and my wife's like, "What's that word?" I'm like, "Just a word I know now because I hung out with Anthony for 5 minutes." So yeah,
Well, I'll tell
so
you this,
I
man. I
appreciate
learned
it.
the secret as a young man that if you learn to speak well, you don't have to be as smart as everybody else because people will think you're smart if your vocabulary betrays you to be smart. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. But yes, I
Yeah.
try to speak well so people can ignore all the other numbskullery that I bring to the table. So
Yeah. Yeah. Every time we talk, I'm dumber and smarter at the same time.
that's what I go for,
just
man. Listen,
it just makes me realize like what words don't I know, but I'm gonna start using them even if I don't know what they mean. Because Anthony used it and it sounded really smart. So
that's how you start. You throw them out there and don't even know what they mean, and then eventually people's reactions they inform you what you
yep,
should be saying.
yeah, yeah. And then the Reigning Champions album, I didn't want to skip over that. Talk about something that was so ahead of its time. Like, I really think we just weren't ready for that as a cheerleading industry because music hadn't turned to fully original yet, right? And that Reigning Champions album, I mean, people don't know we've heard those songs in cheer mixes. Like that album came
Yeah,
out, and I mean, I don't remember how it did. I remember I listened to the preview of every song on iTunes.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
sorry, I didn't download it. Sorry,
No, I mean it
but
was one of those things. Yeah, it kind of made a small splash in the industry, but you're totally right. I mean, at that time, you got to remember, like there was no foreshadowing what was going to happen in regards to the very structure and foundation of cheer music changing the way it did. And so at that point, we were sort of trying to just kind of go to people that direction. Like, okay, here's something you've never heard before, but it's built for this sport. And it's got all the energy that you know and love. And it was also in that era, too, of like, I mean, the decade or so before we put out Reigning Champions, even a little bit more constrained, let's say like 2005 to 2011, 12 or whatever, that era. I mean, that was kind of like the golden age of like pop singers kind of singing dancier EDM. That was when you heard like Usher and Neo and T-Pain and all those guys like on like house tracks and just like more
right.
EDM dance tracks, right? Which was
with
kind of
with
unique.
Tiesto and David Guetta and yeah.
Exactly. That was like really when people's remix game like started to go crazy, and you could get all these random tracks off the internet that were these really bizarre remixes of famous songs, and so that was kind of how you would differentiate back in the day. It was like take a normal pop song everyone knew and find an interesting remix to it, right? And that would kind of be like, whoa, we've never heard this take on it, right? So our thinking was like, okay, if we take the novelty of like this is a cool new track, but we gear everything towards cheer, right? Like the writing is geared towards the sport. Lyrics, of course, are like more inspirational and anthemic, and they're designed to sort of rile you and get you up off the seat, right? Because that's the whole premise of cheer music is you're trying to amplify a routine that's happening in front of thousands of people conceivably. So it's important to make sure you have the energy right. So that whole production of that album, the goal, and I got to of course credit Patrick to this because I mean he just has and always had such a strong vision for what he thought cheer music should be and how it should sound. And it just also so happened that since he was younger, he was just like a fan of kind of EDM and house music. Like I mean, that kind of music, I wasn't really into those genres when I was younger. I was kind of like a metal guy. So I was like hard rock and metal. And that's kind of what I grew up on. And that was what my friend group was into. So that's kind of what, rocked my world at that time. But yeah, I mean, it was really cool. Trying to kind of bridge that gap. And I think people heard it, people liked it, they used it in their material, but it wasn't like a revelation, like maybe we thought it was going to be, or I know Patrick kind of had high hopes for like, no, this is going to be the beginning of like taking people down the path to original music, right? And
Mm.
again, like most great ideas, I think it was just ahead of its time. I think people heard it and they go, okay, that's cool, but we're still going to use Britney and like Ariana Grande and Celine Dion to like make these pyramids and these stunts hit. You know what I mean? So, and we understand that, right? Because we're competing with legends. You know what I mean? So, but I think it was the first glimpse of a potential future that people thought, okay, if we ever had to make this music, I mean, it would be arduous because at that time, I mean, that production process took us, man, 8 or 9 months probably. Tons of like going back and forth with artists, recording, working on production. I mean, now we would make a 10-track album like that. We could put together the whole thing together from start to finish in probably 3 weeks. You know what I mean? Maybe a month. Like, and
Yeah.
that's just how crazy and polished our sort of machine has gotten at this point. But yeah, when we first did this, at this point, 13, 14 years ago, because we started in 2010 before we released it, or maybe the very beginning of 2011. But yeah, I mean, it was a process to get there. So yeah, I mean, that whole process was great, man, and it was it taught us a lot about like what it takes to make records at that caliber and at that level, and for me in that style, because that was one of the first albums I had mixed that was in that style of like, okay, digital sounding, hard hitting drums, like hip hop bass sort of percussion elements to it, but with like dancier, grindier synths, more dubstep kind of EDM flavors, which
Yeah.
I hadn't had much exposure to before, man. But it was a really fun project, and even opened my eyes to a new genre that I really wasn't familiar with, but have since then like found a lot to love and appreciate. You know what I mean? So it was a great process, man, all the way.
Yeah. Oh, it's so ahead of its time. So ahead of its time. And it's like you look at, I mean, that really it has to be the blueprint for, the My Level EDM. There's been 4 of those albums, and really almost the entirety of the first wave of Level 77 content. It's like the birthplace of that. I can hear it, right? It's like was in that Reigning Champions album. And again, it's like it was 5 or 6 years ahead of when the industry did have to switch to fully original. And it's like, and while it may not have, had huge success, it was like that really geared everybody up, and it kind of gave, New Level Music a kind of a head start, in that
Yeah,
direction. It was like, yeah, and it's definitely, and it's benefited me. And this has been one of my favorite interviews because, as you said, like you're like a metalhead. Like I was way more into like alternative and like punk, not so much the pop punk. I do enjoy the pop punk, but like if you listen to my playlist when I work out, right, it's like you're hearing Taking Back Sunday, you're hearing Korn, you're hearing Limp Bizkit, you're hearing Slipknot. Like these are the things that I listen to when I work out, right?
right,
And then I come into the studio and I'm like, all right, time to do like a Britney Spears, mixed with David Guetta and, Usher and all this other stuff. It's like, it's a
right.
complete different, and as you said, it's like it created a whole new appreciation for this genre that, I probably never would have gotten into any sort of EDM until I became a cheer music producer. And now I
Likewise,
have a deep appreciation for it. And I'm like, I can vibe with that.
no
Yeah,
doubt.
that's that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, and so you kind of touched on something that is a perfect segue, if I would have just been quiet, into my next question, which is, what trends, if any, have you seen? I think everybody's aware of the music change in 2016, but really from 2016 to now, have you seen any trends, if any, that have either stood the test of time, or any that have really shifted, again, since the original music rule has come out? Have you seen any trends that you've seen over the last like 8 or 9 years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because cheer music is always it's kind of in a weird space, right? Like it exists almost in a world. So to an extent, the thing about cheer is that since the music is largely based on the structure of the routine, the music tends to change more often when routine structure changes, if that makes any sense. Because for the most part, you're kind of pigeonholed into the structure that most people have always known to a cheer routine to be, right? You're going to open up with standing tumbling. You're going to go into some choreo. You might hit jumps. You might, running tumbling is going to be here, usually pyramid here, dance here, right? So as long as that basic structure remains intact, there's certain rules within the production of cheer music that people tend to follow. And so I think the biggest differences have largely been in kind of like the content that informs those parts. In other words, like it's kind of become a practice that a running tumbling section is largely going to be faster, up tempo, much more of like, like a hard house kind of feel typically, or like a hard rock kind of feel. Just that's where a lot of the energy is going to go, right? So really what's changed over the years is, maybe a decade ago when we first started doing this kind of stuff, and it's like, God, it's almost been 10 years now since the industry changed, which is crazy to think. But yeah, let's say, 8 years ago when the industry changed, everything was still very much stuck in that like 2010s, 2000 mid 2010s kind of vibe of like songs and kind of sound structure. So it was a lot of kind of bigger pop, anthemic pop hooks to like more like EDM kind of backings, like big anthem chords and stuff like that, right? As the industry has shifted and gotten more, I think, away from like really elaborate production, and I mean that to say, like, in pop music now, for example, and even dance music, there's much less layering and stacking of vocals than there used to be, for example. People are much more inclined to just have one strong, solid take of a verse or even a chorus now, especially like in rap, you hear this. I mean, rap used to be layers upon layers of vocals to get those big kind of gang sounds from like, from Atlanta, of course. So like Atlanta hip hop in like the early 2000s was all just big layers, like rooms full of people, kind of party music, right? Well, now hip hop has gotten a little bit darker, and I don't mean darker in the sense of like subject matter, because there's always been whatever with the subject matter, but it's gotten darker in tone. Like beats are now kind of scarier and a little bit darker, and like more. They're more concerned with like atmosphere than they are necessarily just like in your face lyrical content. So you've seen some cheer mixes shift that way too, here and there. But the reality is, the people who are running the cheer industry tend to typically be people in their early 30s to mid 40s kind of thing. It's typically older coaches, athletic directors, and sort of higher end personnel like that. Younger people are just starting to come up in the industry. And now, oddly enough, I mean, they're always coming up in the industry, but there's a new kind of wave of people coming in, right? And even though some of these kids are like, maybe in their early 20s or whatever, they've grown up being coached by older athletes who were feeding them a lot of the music that they came up with when they were young, right? So now you have, I mean, I'll never forget this recently. I know a random segue, but I was at a school dance with my oldest son, who's a 4-year-old, and it was like his first ever school dance, and they were playing all these songs, and these little 5 and 6-year-old girls knew every lyric to Spice Girls, "If You Want to Be My Lover." Or like Cyndi Lauper, "Girls Just Want to Have Fun." Like these girls were spitting every single line like verbatim, and I was like, how are these people learning those songs? Like those songs are super old. Like even I barely remember "If You Want to Be My Lover," and that came out when I was a kid, right? And these girls who have no cultural connection to that material just have heard it enough where they know it, right? And I think that only exists because of their parents, right? So I think the younger, I think you're still going to have a lot of like 25-year-old cheer coaches who want to hear like Miami bass song, like sounding song from the mid '90s, like as their dance cut. You know what I mean? Which is
Yeah.
funny. So that's what's interesting about cheer music is it sort of like it kind of exists beyond any typical genre that may or may not be popular right now. So like whether hard sounding EDM music has like as much mainstream success as it did maybe 15 years ago, I think that music persists in cheer like pretty steadily across almost every different kind of routine level and sort of skill set. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of some of the stuff I've noticed over the years. Ballad kind of stuff, stunts, pyramids, those big ballad songs, like those are always kind of timeless, right? Like they either end up sounding like an old Whitney Houston record, which we love, like emotional piano kind of this, or they take a more modern tone of like a big anthem EDM kind of sound, right? Like something like Sia would do, right? Like big long notes, like epic progressions and stuff like that. So those are kind of staples that almost always pervade. But yeah, it's funny. It's fun to watch the genres switch as the industry pushes forward.
Yeah. Right on. Okay, so now I want to shift, and I know I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I would love to hear some really, really maybe not core memories, but just great memories you've had, or let me word it this way: what has been some of the most rewarding parts of what you do in the cheer industry? Like what are some things that made you feel like, wow, I'm making an impact, this like I'm really kind of your influence has influenced producers, because I can tell you ways that you've impacted my career, but I'm really interested in like what was rewarding for you, like what was just a satisfying experience. Can you give me a couple of those?
Yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. And there's plenty, dude. I really can't deny the fact that I was just kind of apprehensive about cheer when it was first presented to me because, I came from like when I was in high school, all my friends were kind of like the musician, like burnout kids. Like we didn't really talk to the cheerleaders much. Like we weren't really enemies, but we just didn't really mess with each other. So that was just a whole different world to me. And of course, like anyone else who doesn't know much about a thing, right, you come to these things with your own sort of preconceived notions about, what cheerleaders are, what kind of people are involved in the industry. But I'm proud to say, man, I've met like really amazing people in the industry that honestly I would consider friends of mine, and in some cases lifelong friends. And it's kind of funny, man, because even though cheer comes off as like, if you're in high school, you see cheerleaders, you expect them to be just like these classical, prim and proper, like preppy kid, all the P words, you know what I mean? Preppy kids who sort of are kind of one hive mind, and there's probably not that much interesting about them. They're going to grow up and work at Wells Fargo and make a lot of money and have, sort of cliche, but man, there's so many weird people in the cheer industry. Like, there's so many like out there personalities, and even within the bounds of like, okay, someone may have a frattier or like a more cliche sorority presentation. You might find all sorts of kooky stuff about that person when you start to dig deep. And cheer is what they love. Most of these people, it's what they're passionate about. So you learn so much about them by talking to them about this. So I say all that to say, number one, yeah, the people I've met have been incredible in the industry and have definitely changed my life and my perspective on what cheerleading is just broadly. And even more broad than that, I think what kind of athletes, like what personalities athletes can be, or just that sort of, the cliches you hear about athletes and athletics. And for me and my musician burnout friends, that was like, we're not interested in that, But the music in the cheer side is it's a cool kind of hybrid world where I get to see sort of a little bit of both of those things. But from a career and like work standpoint, I mean, the thing I'm proudest of, honestly, is just we've gotten to really kind of establish our sound and our company's sound as sort of a new, without trying to sound too haughty about it. I think the work we've done has really helped kind of inform the way modern cheer music sounds. And I think broadly, even I don't even mean that just within the context of our company or our producers. I hate to admit this, but like a lot of other industries, the cheer music industry in particular can be very derivative. Kind of like the mainstream industry, right? Somebody hears something or sees an approach that works, and everybody flocks to it and kind of attempts to either recreate it or create something better than it. And I feel very fortunate that with New Level, we've been able to kind of really push the envelope as far as the quality that you can get from this production. Because I think my biggest challenge early on was like, okay, given the source material these people are working with, back in the day, before you had to make original songs, I was trying to find a crafty way to get an Eagles song from 1974 to blend into a David Guetta song from 2007. You know what I mean? And you can't ask for two more drastic styles of production or forms of production. So to make all that stuff work, we had to get pretty creative with how we mixed and processed things. And of course, in doing that, it just taught us a lot about I guess what you could call maybe the best practices of cheer music production, right? Like it sort of helped us establish an outline for, okay, what are some numbers and thresholds that we need to hit to make this music satisfy the conditions for which it's going to be played and exist? Because cheer music is a really unique phenomenon in that it's one of the only genres of music in which you have to really kind of contend with really two things that are wild variables. The first one is stadium playback, because a lot of the cheer music that you hear comes in the form of competition. And these stadiums that these athletes compete in are certainly not built with sound quality in mind. I'll just put it that way to frame it as kindly as I can. And so a lot of times you're competing with bad sound systems. A lot of times personnel who don't know necessarily how to run those bad sound systems effectively. And then the second variable, which is really crazy about cheer, that's almost unique to it, and I don't think there's an exception, is it's not often that Ed Sheeran or Lady Gaga or Britney or Beyonce, whoever, is going to be at a concert, and if they're singing one of their major hit songs, right, the worst they can usually expect is the crowd of people maybe singing the lyrics along to the song, right? In cheer, if you're a big team that's got a lot of kind of eyes on you and people are waiting for your routine, the second the second you hear that first ding and the routine starts, you're going to be basically drowning in audience noise, like shrieking, shouting, not even the lyrics of the song, just people losing their minds, going crazy, trying to hype you up and get you to hit your routine, right? So on the music side, we've had a lot to contend with that's unique to this industry, right? So I will call back to your original question and just say I think the proudest thing for me is getting to just kind of play a small part, and again, some people would argue a large part in kind of showing people how to make this music sound good and what good cheer music can sound like. And again, not to besmirch anyone who's done this music before us, man. I mean, there's so many great companies who make cheer music, and it's just fun to be in the industry in general. You know what I mean? But working with Patrick, I mean, you could say so many things about Patrick, and the first of which is that he is absolutely a machine when it comes to executing his vision for what he feels his product should sound like. And so, getting kind of driven that way with him, and of course, that sort of stuff gets me inspired and helps me impart some of that same drive to our producers because. Right now we have a dozen plus producers on staff with us, and my job is to make sure that they all continue to be aware of the quality they're putting out and sort of just the more advanced engineering stuff that the average cheer producer doesn't really have to think much about. So another great accomplishment I feel that I'm proud of is just educating more people on what it takes to make music in general and cheer music in particular. For example, and I'll happily toot your own horn here on your own show, but I feel like you're one of our producers who's advanced themselves to the point where there's no reason why if you didn't want to do it, you couldn't be making real music. Like you could make real songs tomorrow because you have content people who can help you do it. You have a vision for what good music sounds like. You've worked with it for years and years, and you could be making money outside of cheer, making music that has nothing to do with the industry. And that's been such a proud thing for me to just to watch people's talents explode and like to watch people discover more of their own talent. Right. I mean, I love getting to consult you guys. And for those people who don't know, part of my job with the company is I kind of get to fly around to all of our different producers' locations. And part of my job is to really consult them and train them and make sure they know the standards that we expect, and more importantly, that they have the tools and know how to use the tools that we kind of recommend for them to attain that level of quality. So that's super rewarding, man, because then my job kind of almost becomes like a teaching job, and I feel sort of like a high school teacher or a college professor. But the difference is all my students care and they're focused and they're really driven to improve and get better. And so that's a huge part of what I love too, man. Just the ability to show people the light to an extent. And again, I'm not the best audio engineer in the world, right? I just had enough mainstream music experience initially to be able to have a unique take on cheer music, right? Because I think before Patrick, no one else had really thought to hire anybody from outside the cheer industry to come in and consult them on the work they were doing within it. Cheer music, as you know, as a lot of people who do it or have dabbled in it know, it's a very secretive practice, and not a lot of people are happy to share knowledge or information about it. Kind of outside of our company, we sort of have to be that way as well, just to kind of guard industry trade secrets and whatnot, right? But once you're within our fold and we got our arms around you, I mean, we want to build champions, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what we've been able to do with our sort of our curriculum set, and it's all stuff I'm really proud of, man. Super cool.
It's awesome. Well, I mean, and I appreciate, you sharing so much. I appreciate everything that you've shared with me. I appreciate the compliment. I, I am indebted to you for so many reasons and so much. I mean, you've done little things, when you've come to consult, like I think the simplest things are like, I remember the first time you came out, you're like, why are your speakers there? I'm like, oh, I thought, that'd be the best. You're like, no, don't put them there. Put them over here. Right. And I'm like, okay. And it's like, what those small little things, right. Where the speakers are just where I thought a cool spot in my studio would be. And you're like, no, man, put them over here. This is where you want your speakers at. And it's like, and just, you'll do little things like that. You'll tweak the plugins and you'll get that. And it has helped this thing, right? Like I've been doing cheer music for 20 years ish. I wouldn't say I've been doing good cheer music for that long, but I've been doing it for that long. But I've always felt like, I feel like I could be creative and I could do these things, but I just didn't know the technical side of it, right? Like I didn't know how to get it to sound the way that I wanted to sound. I know that I could do cool things. I could do cool beat structures. I could, get this feeling that I had inside of me, but I couldn't make the computer do what my brain wanted it to do, right? And since getting into and working with you, it's like you have taken that sound, right, like the technical side of it, and you have almost just unleashed I really can't even think of the best way to describe it. It's like I felt like I was like, have you ever had a dream where you're fighting someone and you just punch like you're underwater?
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
100%.
Like that's how I felt like I was doing cheer music for the first like 15 years. And it's like when you stepped in and you're like doing all this stuff, you sit at my desk for, 6, 7 hours and you do all these things. It was like all of a sudden I was awake. I was out of the water. I had just taken some like Hulk juice pre-workout and it was like, bah, 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 you know what I mean? And it's just you have freed me from this underwater prison that I was in, and it's just allowed me to do what was like it was always in here. It was always in here. I just couldn't get it on the computer, and you have done. And there's so much that goes into it, and I don't even want to try to explain it because I would do a terrible job. But I'm just so grateful for all the things that you've done for me, not just so that I could have this breakthrough as a professional, but also I mean, and this as well, like we provide for our families with this. We've got a wife and we got kiddos that,
Yeah.
Are counting on us to be providers for our family. And once you brought that technical side to what I do, it's like it's really unleashed and it's given me the opportunity to make a greater impact, not just in the industry, but also for my family, and so I'm just so grateful for everything that you've done. That was a really, really long-winded way of saying thank you. Thank you very
Man.
much for everything.
No, I really appreciate that, man. That's really huge to hear. And honestly, your feedback is probably among the favorite feedback that I get from producers after our first few consults. I just got it from our new friend Mike, who is about to start working with us. And I've heard this before from a lot of producers where they feel kind of creatively at a plateau because they have all these great ideas, but they just can't execute them the way they always, as you said, everyone says they want to hear it in their head what's on the computer speakers or vice versa, what's in their head out of the computer speakers. And getting people, even, I mean, that's every musician and every engineer's kind of dream and struggle, right? Like that's sort of what, I mean, every musician at any level of the industry will describe, like, I have the most fun when what's in my head comes out and is in my hands and I can play it and it sounds that way, right? So being able to get people even a little bit closer to that vision, and those two visions, most importantly, matching each other, right? Like what's in here is as close to what's out here as possible. I
Yeah.
mean, that's my favorite thing in the world to hear, man, because that's such a big point of frustration for every music creator, and particularly I think cheer music producers, because again, if you're not with a company or you're sort of a lone wolf, like there's just no one to ask. Like there's no one to ask who will tell you at least like what you're
Yeah.
missing, and they'll just be like, "Hey man, it sounds good. Well, what if I do
Yeah.
this? What about that? Yeah, just try to change this setting and you'll be fine." There's not. No one's really willing to kind of take people in and show them like, hey, no, this is how engineering works in this context. Like this is how, I mean, if you know enough about engineering, a lot of our producers now, you could be in any session anywhere and hit record and kind of know what to look for, and whether it's got anything to do with cheer music or not, you can tell when you're clipping, you can tell when your levels are off kilter, you can tell when things are balanced properly. Like these are all skills that people work really hard to obtain, and it's such a gift, I think, to just be able to show you guys a little bit of that, you know what I mean, and just get you even thinking in that way, and it's so much fun, man.
Yeah. Well, and again, like there's so many different things that you've taught over the years, and you've shared such a wealth of knowledge. I mean, when I first started, it was like Cool Edit Pro, right? It was which
Right.
I think evolved into Adobe Audition. And then, when I evolved past that, I was, Acid Pro, which one of the worst
Acid Pro.
one of the worst DAWs ever created. Not because of what it could or couldn't do, because it was very intuitive. It was great, but like they didn't upgrade the software ever with
Right.
as computers were getting upgrades, and so Acid Pro just notoriously would just crash. Like if you didn't autosave and back up your hard drive every like minute, every 60 seconds, you would lose everything. It would just crash. It would crash 3-4 times a day.
Acid's biggest strength, as a lot of producers will remember, of course, is in beat mapping and like sort of like the paint function, where you could literally just take a sample and sort of paint it perfectly on grid automatically. That was actually really ahead of its time, and the sound of it was really good too. And then like time stretching algorithm was pretty sharp in Acid Pro, despite, I mean, kind of everything else about it was a little archaic, but those two functions, oddly enough, were like pretty ahead of their time. And incidentally, those are really important functions in cheer production, which is why I think that DAW persisted as long as it did. Of course, they stopped making it after a while, and then they kind of rebooted it, and now it's, I think, back under a different name. But yeah, man, those were good times.
Yeah.
Early
But
Acid.
Oh, and but then like, I used to think that was it, right? It was that, but now with especially, working with you, it's like now I know how to work in Adobe Audition. I know how to work in Pro Tools. I could still work on Acid if I did need to. I can work in Reaper. I
Yeah.
think I already said Pro Tools, and it's like so many different things. And now because of all those experiences, now I could work in a Logic. It would be a little wonky and it would take some learning, but like you can learn all these things just because it's almost like a language and then like a derivative of that, and maybe not derivative, but like how there's different Spanish, right? Like if you go to one part of Mexico, they're speaking Spanish, right? But if you go to a different part of Mexico, it's still Spanish, but there's little differences and nuances. It's kind of like that,
100%. Yeah, I mean, you're
Yeah.
just learning software, right? So as long as you know how to learn software, you can sort of make things happen. And then in the context of DAWs, digital audio workstation, which is just a fancy way of saying, software that one records or processes audio on, they're all the same. They all do the same things. It's just a matter of finding the right keys to make it happen and finding how you navigate, but they all fundamentally do the exact same thing. So,
Yeah.
um,
That's awesome. Well, thank you again. Okay, so now I want to go into some of your favorite stuff, and then we'll get wrapping up. So I want to know if there are any. Do you have any favorite vocals that you've done for a cheer mix? Obviously, because that's the people that are gonna be watching this. Are there any vocals that you've done in a cheer mix that like right now in your head you're like, oh yeah, that one was pretty. That was pretty cool. That was pretty fun.
I mean, there's so like probably some of the more prominent ones. Like I don't, and I always forget the names, but I think "No Retreat, No Surrender" is like become kind of like a famous cheer track. I know Pat's used it a whole bunch in like a whole bunch of different products over the years, and yeah, that was kind of like. I think the reference for that one was the Final Countdown, the old I forget who sing that old '80s glam rock track, the Final Countdown. So no retreat, no surrender sounds a lot like that, but it's kind of an iconic sounding part, and it's useful in like every context. You can use it in like modern EDM context, old kind of '80s like rock sort of stuff. So that one's always cool. Um, there's a couple more I can't remember. Of course, there was a time when I was just like Mr. Pyramid and Mr. Stunt for Stingray All Stars for a while. So there was a couple years in a row where I was the Pyramid on Orange. There was a couple years. Of course, you've been gracious enough to put me on stuff. I think Electric and some other stuff like that for them over the years. And then, of course, yeah. I mean, I did stuff back in the day for Woodlands, Cheer Athletics. I've been really lucky, man, to be able to. And that's not even a thing I do. I'm not really a singer. I'm more of like an engineer who sings, I guess. So I just they'll throw me on content here and there when they need a male voice. But and you've been gracious enough to use my content as well. But yeah, man, it's a lot of fun. Again, the fun thing about cheer music is you get to perform and do all sorts of weird genres and weird takes on genres that you just wouldn't encounter working in the day-to-day mainstream music industry. So yeah, No Retreat,
Yeah.
No Surrender is a good one. I can't even remember any of the other ones off my head, but yeah, it's been a fun ride over the years.
Yeah. Well, talking about you being the Stingray Orange guy, the Pyramid guy, it's like not only have I've gotten requests, people like, hey, whoever did Stingray Orange Pyramid 2016 is like, I want them on the track. I'm like, you know what? You're in luck because I happen to know the guy.
I know the guy.
But also, like a really, really special moment for me was I remember being in the arena, in 2015, 16, 17. I mean, all the years, but I remember being in the arena and seeing Stingray Orange perform and hearing you be in the Pyramid and hearing the entire arena, just singing along with it, right? And then fast forward to, I can't remember if it was 2021 or 2022, but it was the first year that I was able to do Stingray Electric's music. And that was, really the first kind of really big gym, big team that, had me produce a really, like, that's a big deal, right? The whole industry knows Stingray All Stars. The whole industry knows Stingray Electric. And then for me to be the producer that got to produce that was an incredible honor. Just getting that call is an incredible honor. But
Right.
then being in the arena and hearing my music, I just hit myself in the face. But hearing, my mix being played in the arena, it being Stingrays and you being in the Pyramid, it was like it was an emotional experience for me. That was like, you're actually a professional cheer music producer now. It's like
You made it, bro.
right? Like that
We're
was
here.
yeah, that was a very cool moment. And then you being a part of it, that was a huge deal. Because again, I remember being in that arena, hearing you on that track with that program. It's like, and then 5, 6 years later,
You know, it's
full
funny, man.
circle.
I think I was at that Worlds as well, and I've had a couple memories of that, and I think another time it happened with Senior Elite. I think maybe I did a Senior Elite thing, and everyone was, and but it's or maybe not something to your extreme, but so anyway, yeah, I have a couple memories of being in the stadium or being in whatever a arena at at Worlds, and just yeah having a whole room full of people yelling lyrics back to me that I sang, and I remember kind of looking around at the time when it was happening and thinking like, all right, this is pretty cool. That was, to go back to one of your earlier questions, another one of my kind of favorite moments in the industry where it's like, okay, like this, now it feels like the big time. It's funny because ever since I was a kid, I didn't really have much interest in going back on stage or performing much. But then that
Mhm.
kind of gave me that little glimpse of like, oh, this is like a rock star moment for you. You know what I mean? The stadium of thousands of people is singing your lyrics at you. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
that was a really cool feeling. It was another reminder of why this job is so much fun, and
Yeah.
why I take so much pride in doing it.
Hold on. Okay, now I have a tough one for you
Yeah.
because as we've talked about, you've been in this industry for over a decade. Your ears in studio have touched hundreds of thousands of mixes at this point. I want to know, and this is really just for me, what mixes that and it doesn't matter the producer, but what mixes are on your Mount Rushmore that you've heard, and I'm sure you're gonna have a more technical approach to
Right.
why you like it, like the clarity or the audio or whatever. But yeah, I want to know your Mount Rushmore top four in no particular order, top four mixes that you've heard since you've been in the cheerleading industry.
Wow, dude. Wow. That is
I told
pretty.
you it's gonna be a tough one.
Yeah, that's a tough order. That's a tall order. It's interesting because I almost think about it as like I almost have to segment things into like two eras. It was like before original music and after original music to an extent, because some of that stuff is, I mean, some of the I think I want to say there was a Stingray Orange mix we did, and I don't recall which year, but there was a year where we had like T-Pain, Akon, Bone Crusher, and like one other person, like one other huge star, like in a maybe like Young Jock or something like that, or maybe like I don't even know. It could have been any of the Roscoe Dash. It could have been any of those guys that we were working with back in the day. And I remember there was one mix that we did that was like such a powerhouse. And it was, of course, they were re-singing like versions of their famous songs, but they would just replace lyrics with cheer lyrics. But yeah, it was like Ying Yang Twins, Akon, T Pain, and like Bone Crusher were like all in one mix. So I mean, that was like iconic, and that would have been like Orange. I don't even know which year, maybe 2016, 17, something like that, maybe even earlier, maybe like 13, 14. So that's pretty amazing. Honestly, after the switch, I'd be lying if I said I didn't really love like all the Top Gun large co-ed mixes that we've done in the last couple of years, because those are just such. I mean, they cheer at such a high level, and their choreography and everything they do is so tight that it's so much fun to build those routines. And of course, everyone in the industry knows Victor and his whole gang, and like they're just such visionaries, man, and they have such a really cool take on themes. And a lot of times as a cheer producer, themes can kind of be the bane of our existence if they're not well thought out. Let's say it that way for the sake of diplomacy. And when that happens, it makes our lives very difficult. And we have the really good fortune in working with people like Victor and Top Gun that their vision is very well laid out. So we get to execute well on that. And then honestly, man, we've had a couple. Man, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, we did a Woodlands Elite Black Ops mix that was just, I mean, hard hitting, bro, from start to finish. Like their branding is like pretty fun to work with, right? Because it's a lot of military style stuff, so everything is heavy and like military marching drums, gunfire, explosions, cannons, machine guns, like classic man stuff. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
it's always fun to get a little more testosterone when you work on those mixes. But no, I mean we did a mix for them a while ago that was really cool, really cool. Honestly, so those are probably my three, and then the fourth one I can remember was probably one of the. I'm not sure how far it was to when music went original, but back in the day we did a lot of mixes for Brandon Senior Black, and we did a Brandon Senior Black mix. I want to say I forget when to. It would have been like mid 2000s, but we had this cool like riff on like the Justin Timberlake part where it was like I'm bringing Senior Black, yeah, like from like we just did a sexy back version with like Senior Black, and that was like a really iconic mix. I remember too in that era, like that people kind of like flipped over that. So I mean, yeah, those are kind of my four: some Stingray, some Woodland, some Top Gun, and a nice little sousson of cheer programs in there for you.
Yeah. Dude, that's awesome. Dude,
That's tough though,
you
man.
just
Yeah,
took me
we've been a part of
back.
so many good ones, dude.
You
It's
took
just
me
such a
back
fun
to the
thing.
I remember that. I'm bringing senior black. I remember that.
Really,
Dude.
that's
Oh
awesome.
my gosh. Yeah, that was oh my god. What was that? 2005, 6, 7? What was that?
I mean,
Yeah, it
this would
was
have been so that would have been like before I was even involved if it was that old. But we it must have been that we did maybe that was playing off of something that had already happened previously. But we this would have been like sometime between 2012 and 2020 or something like
right.
that.
Well,
So
and to be fair, there's not much that stays up here.
yeah, I mean,
I've been hitting the head a lot. Plus, I'm just not that bright to begin with.
got a lot of CTE we're dealing with in this conversation, bro. You and me, we've
So it could be 2006, it could be 2014, and there's really you can't trust my judgment or opinion on it
time
at all.
flies when you're having fun, baby.
Okay, so we got that, and we really got just two more things. One more question: if there's anyone out there that just happens to be, they happen to catch this right. If anybody other than my mom is watching, shout out to my mom. Love you, mom. If there's anybody out there that just has I don't even want to say passion. If there's anybody that has a passion for cheer music, not just an interest, but they're like, I really want to do this. Is there any advice that you would give them to like help them kind of maybe push through any sort of barrier that they may be facing or any sort of insecurity or apprehension? Is there any advice you would give to someone that like wants to get in?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Honestly, and the best advice is something that I think creative people have a hard time hearing, which is you have to get out there and talk to people, man. Like you have to meet people, you have to get in front of people, you have to show people. Like if this is a passion of yours, people need to see that before they're going to be willing to part with their money to get you to help create something for their teams. You know what I mean? Like a lot of creative people who make cheer music and creative people who make other art in general, right? They kind of typically are isolated, maybe a little bit more socially awkward, maybe a little bit tougher to get out of their shell. And especially in the cheer industry, if this is the industry you want to work in, you simply have to push through that. You just do. There's no way around it. It's a shiny industry, right? There's a lot of sequins on T-shirts. There's a lot of barracudas, right? People who just see a shiny thing in front of them and they swim right for it, right? And so you have to be shinier and more talented than the people you're working against, right? So if you're a talented cheer music producer, but maybe you haven't produced for a lot of big teams yet, um, like literally start emailing people, start emailing gyms, start emailing music companies. I mean, so many people that work for us at New Level now have come to us because they literally just had the gumption to reach out and they sounded enthusiastic and they showed us that they were hungry. They maybe recorded some demos or sent us some sample mixes and we're like, hey, what do you, even if it's just to get an opinion, hey, maybe I'm not ready for you guys yet, but what's a good trajectory for me to aim for? Like, what can I work on to get better at this? You know what I mean? I think for cheer music, again, in a world where it's not a very widely known sector of the industry, even still, which is amazing to me because it's been popular and kind of it's been an industry for you could say 20 something years, right? Since the 90s and 2000s when there was first a need to start mashing up songs for cheer routines, right? So it's been widely established, but again, it's largely kind of it's existed under the surface, bubbling like underneath. I think the larger industry as a whole. So yeah, man, you really just have to be hungry for the knowledge, and you have to maintain, what Buddhists would call the beginner's mindset, right? Like you need to always approach these things with a thirst for knowledge, right? Like you're a perfect example of this because you're a very learned producer. You're an educated man. You've been in this game long enough to know largely how a lot of this stuff works. And you don't necessarily need me to come consult with you every year, but you do it anyway because you know that no matter how subtle or nuanced our adjustments to your now banging template might be, there's always ways we can get better. You know what I mean? Every year, even if it's a small thing, even if it's you just learning more about what's actually happening behind the curtain of your processes. Because for a lot of these guys and you guys, I'll set up your templates and some plugins and processes and chains and stuff. And my job is to kind of make it so you don't have to think about that stuff as much. But I will say that producers and people who are the most successful and the most produce the highest quality, let's just say in this industry, are people who don't just turn their brains off in regard to that stuff, who actually do occasionally think about, okay, man, this is a cool plugin Anthony put on my vocal chain, but how else could I use it? Maybe I could use this on some other instrument. Maybe I could use this setting for something else. That sort of thinking is, I think, what what really helps you learn to create and, more importantly, differentiate yourself in cheer, right? Because I think that's the hardest part. I mean, you could study and worship the works of Bo Beal or Blake Bierman or Patrick Avard or some of Taylor Sullivan, some of these heavy hitters, and you can try to sound as much like them as you want, but you're not going to make a mix like Taylor, and you're not going to make a mix like Bo necessarily, right? So you have to try to kind of cut your own path. And part of that involves experimentation, right? So another piece of advice I would give is you can't be afraid to fail. I mean, that goes without saying in anything really, but I know in cheer, I'm sure you guys have, you're working on new skills, right? You're talking to some 6-year-old girl who's going to be doing her first, full around or whatever, and there's some coaxing that's involved in getting someone to have the courage to really execute. You know what I mean? And that same thing applies to music. I mean, don't be afraid to leave your comfort zone. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And I don't know, man. It's if you just approach it with an open mind and willingness to learn, and you just got to put yourself in front of people, man. You really do. You have to. I mean, the good thing is a lot of these people who produce cheer music are former kind of athletes, and so at least part of that like tempers you in a way where you're like, oh, I didn't make the team this year. That's lousy. Like maybe next year, but you're not. Rejection at that level is not totally unfamiliar to you. So a lot of cheer people, and of course they have the confidence usually to be like really, to be bold and have the sort of the what do you want to say, even like just the kind of the fortitude to like continue to pursue opportunities even if they get rejected or if the feedback is not what they want to hear. Because people have sent me cheer mixes before and I've been like, hey man, this is not it. Like you got to work on this and this. You got to work on levels. You got to get vocal delivery, and stuff like that. And some people are like, oh man, that sucks to hear, but it's like anything else, right? That feedback is what will make you better, right? I mean, anyone who's learned anything. I mean, look, people want to think about doing everything on their own, but look at every major professional athlete you've ever known or appreciated or whatever, they're all coached like obsessively by dozens of people oftentimes, right? Like you can't build champions in isolation. You know what I mean? You kind of need a team to help guide you and push you. And I think that's the last piece of advice I would give to someone, right? The quicker you can attach yourself to a team of people, whatever that looks like, it doesn't even have to be a music company like ours or like any of the other ones out there. It could just be you're a cheer producer and you've paired up with a mainstream producer who makes instrumentals or who makes beats, or you have one rapper or one singer that you're really tight with and you guys like build your sound together. Like that's the most important thing, man. Just find somebody who thinks like you and can work like you and can keep up with you. And if you do that consistently for a long enough time, you will get good enough at this job that somebody will pay you money for it. Plain and simple.
There you
So
go.
that's my advice.
Boom. That was like 8 or 9 bars. I hope y'all were taking notes. Right. Don't worry, there's captions too, so everybody get a rundown. That was
better.
awesome.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much. Okay. So the last thing, and we'll get out of here. I just want to open it up to you. The floor is yours. I've done this for every interview, and some people thank their mom, and some people tell their kids they love them. Some people spit out more advice, but I just want to open it up to you. If there's anything that's kind of on your mind, on your heart, anything you want to share with the cheer world or just the world, the universe, the ether, anything you want to put out there, the floor is yours, sir.
Man, I thank you for that. I don't know. I'm a big like gratitude guy, right? And I think that's kind of become a cliche that people say like, "Oh, just be grateful for this and that." But I'm genuinely grateful for like very small things in my life and very big things too. And I guess if I have a second to say anything, it would just be to express my thanks and my gratitude to the cheer industry broadly, just for taking me in to an extent. You know what I mean? Because I've been one of those guys who most of my life I kind of have been on my own, and I've sort of operated as a lone wolf, and that's worked out for a really long time, and it definitely helped kind of build me into what I am today. But I'm really grateful, for the people I've gotten to meet and just for the opportunities I've gotten to experience because of my time in cheer, man. And it's a group of people who didn't really have any reason to take me in or think that I was anything special because I'm just such a kind of an outsider compared to what most people in the industry are. But what I came to find in getting into it is that it's an industry full of outsiders to an extent. It's an industry full of misfits. And despite how kind of perfect the makeup looks on the outside, you know what I mean? There's probably a really weird chick in there who's got all sorts of interests that have nothing to do with with dancing and flipping. You know what I mean? So it's just been super amazing to discover that about the industry and about cheerleaders in general. You know what I mean? The cliches are occasionally true and they're occasionally not. And when I encounter, thoughtful, brilliant, intellectual people in the cheer industry, which you do, believe it or not, they're out there. It's just really refreshing, man, and really nice to see a stereotype bucked. You know what I mean? And these are not all kind of just mindless athletes. There's brilliant thinking, beautiful people in this industry, man, and they've treated me so well, and it's just fun to be a part of it, and to even say that I have had any impact in how the industry operates or how people think about music. Is very meaningful to me, man. So yeah, so thank you to everybody who's given me a shot to lend these big old ears to an industry that I never thought I would encounter, and to have people give me such great feedback and praise and say they like what the work we're doing. I mean, it's amazing. So thank you to you, Bo Beal, for inviting me on your show. I hope this thing persists into eternity because it's really cool and it's been really fun to watch. And thank you for thinking of me as a candidate to hopefully bend people's ears for a little bit.
It's been a pleasure, man. And like, the whole thing is, I really was just curious. That's how all this started. I was just curious after interviewing Jason on his pod. I was like, I bet there's a lot of really cool stories and cool people that I have never heard, and I just want to hear them. And now that I'm just doing music, I got a little bit of time, so
Yeah,
why
man.
not? And I got all this cool equipment. I might as well use it instead of it collecting dust when it's not music season.
That's what we're here for, bro. Yeah, that's what it is. No, I mean, honestly, everything good I've learned and know about life is out of curiosity, is born from me asking smarter people than me questions and having them answer them. And it's funny in a different life, because when I was younger, I had a journalism degree, and part of me thought that I wanted to be an interviewer. That's something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to, because I'm endlessly curious about people. Anyone who knows me or has interacted with me will tell you, like, if I get you at a bar or a restaurant and we start eating, I'm going to be asking you a million questions about your life, because I'm just curious and I like to know about people. And as everyone is now known, I'm very verbose. I like to speak, but I also like to listen, man. I really like to let people talk and try to really take in what they're saying and genuinely respond to what they're saying, rather than just waiting for my next turn to talk. And you're very good at this. You're very adept at this. And so, yeah, I think doing this sort of thing in perpetuity for you would be no sort of a problem.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see. We'll see
Yeah.
what goes on. I don't really have any plan. It's inspired. I already gave Jason his credit, but it was also inspired by Ted Lasso, right? When he's throwing darts and he's like, they were judgmental. He's like, don't be judgmental. Be curious.
That's right.
It's like
Exactly
if they would ever taken the time to know, they would have known I played darts with my daddy every Sunday after. It's like, man, what a great show.
Fantastic.
All right, sir. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. I appreciate your time. Please tell the wife and the kiddos I said hello, and can't wait to see them next time I'm out in the A in just a few months here.
Yeah, man. Same to you, man. Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute blast.
All right, man. Have a good one. We'll talk to you later.
You as well. Take care.
Bye.